December 18, 1944. Camp Concordia, Kansas. The wind howled across the empty plains like it had forgotten to be gentle. Snow blew sideways in thin, angry ribbons across barbed wire fencing. Wooden guard towers stood rigid in the gray sky, their tops wreathed in frost. Somewhere, beyond the gates and floodlights, a train groaned to a halt on an iced-over siding. From its troop sleepers stepped nearly 200 German prisoners of war, dusty-booted, hollow-cheeked, and stunned into silence by the cold. Most had been captured just weeks earlier during the collapse in Normandy and were still wrapped in the soot of France. They didn't yet know the name of this place. Just that it was flat, white, and bitterly unfamiliar. Among them was Oberstreiter Karl Baumer, 28, from Cologne. His overcoat had lost 3 buttons and his breath came in clouds as he descended from the railcar. The air burned inside his nose. He tightened the knot of string that held his gloves together. Behind him, another prisoner muttered, "Is this Siberia?" They were greeted not by snarling guards, but by order. American MPs with rifles slung, coats buttoned up to the neck, stood waiting in pairs. One sergeant barked for the prisoners to line up. No threats. No blows. Just precision. The men were marched across the frozen yard toward the processing hall. Their boots crunched in the snow. From the chimneys of the barracks rose clean smoke. And from somewhere, unthinkably, a piano played. Soft, indistinct, almost dreamlike. Karl looked sideways. The sound was real. Inside the barracks, after delousing, after records were checked and wool blankets distributed, the men were ushered into heated wooden dormitories lined with bunks. There were stoves, lanterns, mattresses. Karl sat down on the edge of a cot that was far too soft. A bowl of chili con carne was handed to him. A cup of something steaming. He took a sip and nearly dropped the mug, coffee hot and bitter, with sugar. That night, the snow deepened. Through the frosted window panes, the Kansas wind howled like wolves in retreat. Then came the lights. In the center of the compound, just outside the administrative office, U.S. guards began assembling something in the dark, a tall frame, a wide wooden box, crates stacked with fir branches. The Germans pressed up against the glass, breath fogging the windows. By morning, it stood fully assembled, a pine tree, easily 10 feet tall, upright in a makeshift stand, garlanded with hand-cut paper stars and strings of popcorn. Tinsel shimmered in the morning frost. A Christmas tree. Inside the barracks, no one spoke for a long time. Karl moved slowly toward the window again. "They put up a tree," someone whispered. "No. Not for us," another said. But they were wrong. That afternoon, a camp interpreter named Captain Samuel Reeves entered the main dormitory with a clipboard and a calm voice. He explained the rules of the holiday week. Work details would be shortened. A choir had been assembled. Supplies for decorations would be distributed to each barracks. A Christmas Eve meal was planned. And yes, trees would be delivered. 1 per barracks. The room was dead silent. One of the older prisoners, a Bavarian named Friedrich, narrowed his eyes. "This is a trick." Captain Reeves nodded as if he'd expected it. "No tricks. It's Christmas." The interpreter left. Within the hour, a group of American guards returned, hauling a smaller tree between them, freshly cut, damp with snow, smelling of pitch and resin. They placed it inside the center of the barracks. One of the guards set down a small box with scissors, glue, and colored paper. No one moved. Until Karl stepped forward. He picked up a strip of paper and began folding, slowly, awkwardly, muscle memory from childhood buried beneath years of war. Friedrich scoffed. "What is this? A children's game?" Karl looked at him. "It's a tree." Outside, the Kansas wind didn't let up. But inside the wooden walls of Barracks 8C, something shifted. A tree stood upright. And 25 German POWs, tired and far from home, stared at it in silence. Not as enemies, but as men trying to remember what December used to feel like. December 19, 1944. Camp Concordia, Kansas. By the second morning, the tree no longer looked like an object placed there by strangers. It looked like something that belonged. Snow pressed against the barracks windows in thin sheets. The wind kept slamming into the wooden walls, making the whole building creak like an old ship. Inside, the potbelly stove glowed red, and men moved around it in slow circles, warming hands that still didn't feel like their own. The pine stood in the center aisle between the bunks. Fresh, sharp-smelling, wet at the base where snow had melted into the wooden floorboards. A simple thing, yet impossible. For most of the prisoners, it had been years since they'd seen a Christmas tree that wasn't propaganda. In Germany, the holiday had become rationed and dim. Candles were rare. Sweets vanished. In some towns, families had resorted to small branches in a jar, decorated with string and paper scraps, because the full trees had been cut for fuel or simply couldn't be spared. Here, in enemy captivity, there was a real one. And the strangest part wasn't the tree itself. It was the silence around it. Karl Baumer sat on the edge of his bunk with the scissors in his hands, turning them over like they were foreign equipment. Across from him, Friedrich watched with folded arms, suspicion hardened into his posture. The older man had fought in the First World War. He remembered bitterness. He expected it. "This is designed to weaken us," Friedrich said, voice low so the guards outside wouldn't hear. "They want us grateful. They want us soft." Karl didn't answer, because part of him agreed. And part of him couldn't look away from what he was seeing. Men who had survived combat, retreat, capture, hunger, now quietly cutting paper into star shapes like boys in a schoolhouse. A prisoner named Otto Schreiber, formerly an apprentice carpenter from Bremen, stood near the tree and held up a string of popcorn the Americans had supplied. It was absurd. It looked ridiculous. White kernels on a thread in a prison camp in Kansas. But Otto's fingers were careful, almost reverent, as he draped it over the pine branches. A few others began to join in. Not because they trusted the Americans. Because the act itself felt familiar. Because it gave their hands something to do besides shake from cold and anxiety. In the corner, near the stove, a man named Rudi Keller, thin, pale, younger than most, sat with his knees pulled to his chest. He hadn't spoken much since arriving. Some said he was captured in the Ardennes during the first hours of what the Americans called the Battle of the Bulge. He had that look, eyes that didn't settle, like the war was still moving inside his head. Karl saw him staring at the tree. "Come," Karl said, holding up a paper star. Rudi hesitated. Friedrich snorted. "Leave him. He's still in the forest." Karl walked over anyway and placed the star in Rudi's lap. Rudi stared down at it like it was a letter he couldn't read. Then he picked up the pencil from the supply box and began shading the edges, slowly, carefully, adding dark lines to make the paper look like it had depth. Like it was real. His breathing eased as he worked. By noon, the tree had changed again. Not beautiful. Nothing in a POW barracks was truly beautiful. UT alive. Covered in crude paper ornaments. Thin strips of colored paper twisted into chains. Popcorn strings. A few tiny decorations made from foil wrappers saved from American rations. And at the very top, a star made from flattened cardboard. The barracks, for the first time since their arrival, sounded different. Men were talking, not about orders, not about escape, not about the front. About home. About the smell of pine in childhood bedrooms. About candles burning too close to curtains. About mothers baking bread when flour still existed. About brothers who never came back from Russia. And once those doors were opened, they didn't close easily. That evening, Captain Samuel Reeves returned with a stack of printed papers and a quiet announcement. A Christmas Eve service would be held in the recreation hall. There would be music. The camp chaplain had arranged it. The prisoners were allowed to attend. "You may sing if you wish," Reeves said carefully. "No one will force you." A German voice from the back called out, rough with cynicism. "And what will you do? Take photographs for your newspapers?" Reeves didn't flinch. "If you sing," he said, "it's for you. Not for us." He left the papers on the table, lyrics in German and English. Carols. Familiar names. Still Nacht. Lies rieselt der Schnee. Karl watched Reeves go, then picked up the sheet. His hands trembled, but not from cold. That night, the men gathered around the stove. The tree cast a jagged silhouette on the ceiling, lit by the weak bulb overhead. Someone produced a harmonica. Another man, who had once been a choir singer back in Dusseldorf, cleared his throat. Friedrich spoke again, quieter now. "This is dangerous," he said, but the edge had softened. Karl looked at him. "What is?" Friedrich stared at the tree, remembering. Outside the barracks, an American MP walked past, boots crunching in snow, collar turned up, rifle slung. He paused briefly, hearing something through the wooden wall. A harmonica. Then voices. So unsteady at first. German voices. Singing Christmas songs in a prison camp, thousands of miles from home. And inside, Karl realized the real power of the tree wasn't kindness or propaganda. It was that it made men remember they were human before they were soldiers. December 24, 1944. Camp Concordia, Kansas. The day begins with ice on the inside of the windows. Karl Baumer wakes before the barracks lights come on, blinking into the dimness. The stove has burned low overnight. Men shift in their bunks, boots lined up beneath the frames like small silent sentries. Outside, the compound is pale and still, buried under a fresh layer of snow that has flattened everything into clean shapes. The usual noise of the camp is muted. No shouting. No banging mess tins. Even the guard towers seem quieter, their outlines softened by frost. Christmas Eve has a weight to it, even here. Especially here. A day that doesn't belong to war, yet war still owns it. Karl sits up and rubs his hands together. His fingertips are cracked from cold and work detail. Across the aisle, Rudi Keller is already awake, staring at the tree. The tree is slightly lopsided now. Its needles are dropping. The popcorn string sags. But it holds its place like a stubborn memory. On the table beside it sits a candle. A real candle. Not lit yet. Karl doesn't know where it came from. Someone must have traded for it. Saved it. Stolen it from somewhere in the camp supply. Or maybe it was placed there. No one asks. In the morning, the prisoners are marched to breakfast. Boots crunch through snow. Their breath hangs in the air in thick, white plumes. American MPs stand at intervals, collars up, hands tucked into their coat pockets when no one is watching. Rifles are present, but their posture doesn't carry hatred. More like duty. Inside the mess hall, the smell hits first. Roast meat. Not much, but enough that every man notices. There is coffee. Hot and black. There are potatoes. There is bread that tastes fresher than usual. There is a thin slice of turkey, real turkey, on each tray, accompanied by gravy ladled on in careful portions. The Germans eat slowly. Quietly. A man at the next table whispers, "My mother would have cried to see this." Friedrich, sitting stiff-backed with his hands near his tray, doesn't respond. But he doesn't scoff either. His eyes keep drifting to the turkey, then away again, as if the food carries a moral question he doesn't know how to answer. After breakfast, there is no work detail. No farm trucks. No shovel assignments. Instead, the camp opens its recreation hall. And for the first time, the prisoners are allowed to move there without the usual rigid pace, without the constant sense that every step is being counted. The recreation hall is a long wooden building with a small stage at one end. It smells of floor polish, wet wool, and pine sap from the branches that have been hung along the rafters. American guards stand along the walls. Still armed. Still watchful. But relaxed enough to let the room breathe. A U.S. Army chaplain steps forward. He is middle-aged, wearing his uniform with a simple cross pinned above his chest pocket. Beside him stands Captain Samuel Reeves, the interpreter, holding papers. The chaplain speaks first, in English, voice calm and measured. Then Reeves repeats the words in German. Not a sermon about politics. Not an accusation. Just a reminder that a day like this exists even in war. That people everywhere, in every uniform, once belonged to families. Karl looks around and sees faces he's only ever seen hard. Men who survived artillery. Men who marched through France. Men who watched friends die. Now they sit with hands clasped, staring at the wooden stage like schoolboys waiting for a teacher to announce something important. Then the singing begins. At first it is hesitant. 2 voices, then 4, then a dozen. Still knacked. The words come out uneven, roughened by cold lungs and years of fear. But the melody holds. Carl sings too, quietly at first. His voice is not strong. It shakes. Yet once it starts, it pulls something up from deep inside him, like a rope dragging a bucket out of a well. And for a few minutes, the war is not in the room. The guard towers are not in the room. The fences are not in the room. There is only the sound of German voices filling a wooden hall in Kansas, singing a song that was older than Hitler, older than uniforms, older than this entire conflict. Carl glances toward the wall. An American MP, young, pale, maybe 19, stands with his rifle held loosely, chin lifted slightly. His eyes aren't mocking. They are fixed on the prisoners with something close to confusion. Because he didn't expect this either. He didn't expect the enemy to sound like people. After the carols, there is a small pause. Reeves steps forward again and clears his throat. There will be a small gift distribution, he says in German. A ripple of distrust moves through the room. Then a few cardboard boxes are carried in, plain, stamped with supply markings. Nothing festive. Nothing theatrical. The boxes are set on a table. Inside are simple items. Socks. Shaving razors. Writing paper. A few candies wrapped in wax paper. Not luxury. But not cruelty. The prisoners receive them one by one. Carl takes his parcel and turns it in his hands, unsure what he's supposed to feel. Gratitude feels dangerous. Anger feels misplaced. The only emotion that fits is confusion, layered with something warmer he doesn't want to name. Behind him, Friedrich speaks in a low voice. I don't understand it, he says. Carl answers without looking away from the small parcel. Neither do I. That evening, back in Barracks 8C, the candle is lit. The flame is small, but it changes everything. It casts soft light across the tree, across paper ornaments, across tired faces. Men sit close together, shoulders nearly touching, drawn by the warmth like moths. Outside, the wind continues. But inside, the barracks feels quiet in a way Carl hasn't felt since before the war. Then someone begins singing again. This time, no one hesitates. And for the first time since capture, Carl realizes something that unsettles him more than any guard tower. The enemy has given them a moment that doesn't feel like captivity. It feels like memory. Christmas Day passed with more silence than celebration. The men in Barracks 8C didn't speak much the morning after. They moved slowly, as if unsure whether to return to the old rhythms of captivity or try to hold on to what the previous night had given them. There was a strange, unspoken understanding that something rare had occurred, a moment that didn't quite belong to either side. By noon, the tree was still standing. No one had touched it. No one wanted to. Its branches drooped more now, sagging under the dry air. But the paper stars, popcorn strings, and bits of foil still clung to it like they had purpose. The candle had burned down to nothing. A pool of hardened wax now rested at the base of the pot it stood in. Friedrich stood next to it, arms crossed, his brow creased. Carl approached quietly. We'll be shipped out eventually, Friedrich said. You know that. Carl nodded. But not before New Year's, he said, offering a faint smile. Friedrich didn't return it. I used to think any kindness from them was manipulation, he said. Propaganda. Or guilt. Or some American attempt to make themselves feel righteous. And now? I still think that, he muttered. But it's not all I think anymore. There was no resolution in his voice. Just the sound of a man trying to reconcile something that didn't fit into the world as he understood it. Over the following weeks, the story of the Christmas tree spread across Camp Concordia. Men from other barracks came by to see it, some skeptical, others openly curious. A few left small things near it, a drawing, a folded letter, a wood carving. The American guards never interfered. Eventually, the pine dried out completely. Its needles littered the floor in a brittle halo. But no one dismantled it. It stood like a grave marker, not to death, but to something that had once been alive in the room. Years later, after repatriation, some of the former POWs wrote about it. A 1947 letter from Private Rolf Dans to a former barracks mate in Bremen recalled the moment as a dream inserted into captivity. He wrote, We were still prisoners, but that night, the walls did not feel made of barbed wire. They felt made of memory. Someone, some American, decided to give us a night we didn't earn and perhaps didn't deserve. That is what I remember more than the cold or the hunger. That a soldier with a gun let me sing, still nacked, without fear. Not all remembered it so kindly. Others resented the gesture. They felt it mocked them, made them feel small. To receive warmth from the enemy could feel like a humiliation, not a gift. But even among the bitter, the memory stuck. What the Americans had done wasn't grand. It wasn't generous in the traditional sense. There were no lavish packages, no sweeping speeches. Just a few branches, a candle, and a room where no one raised their voice. To the men who had fought through Africa, France, and the Eastern Front, that was enough to confuse them. And in that confusion, something cracked. Not allegiance, not belief, but certainty. And when a soldier loses certainty, even for a night, something changes. Karl never spoke much about the war after returning home. He married, had a son, worked in a post office in Leipzig. But every December, he went to the market and found a small pine tree. He trimmed it, not too tall. He placed it by the window where it could be seen from the street. He hung plain decorations. He lit one candle. And he told his son nothing. Until one year, the boy asked, "Why do you always use that little tree?" Karl paused for a long time before answering. "Because one night," he said, "my enemies gave me